How many times have you felt trapped in the stagnation of relationships, repeating unconscious patterns and feeding your ego without even realizing it? Enough self-deception. As long as you don't confront your own shadows, you will only attract more suffering and frustration. Today I will reveal, no beating around the bush, the practical secret, inspired by Jung, for breaking that cycle and achieving genuine self-mastery. You will learn how to change your inner state, align your energy, and awaken a magnetic presence capable of transforming any relationship. Don't expect external miracles. Change depends on you taking action now. If you want to escape mediocrity and tap into the inner power that changes everything, stay with me until the end. What I'm about to show you could be your turning point. Give this video a like to strengthen this current of transformation. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Many people miss out on life-changing content simply because they're not subscribed and fall behind. Allow yourself to go deeper than the surface and discover the reward awaiting those who dare to act differently. Deep within the male unconscious beats a desire that goes beyond fleeting attraction or mere physical interest. It's the search for recognition, validation, and above all, profound contact with his own essence. Jung teaches us that the masculine ego, often driven by unconscious mental patterns, tends to seek in others whatever it lacks in itself, projecting unresolved needs and hidden emotional wounds onto relationships. It is in this silent interplay between lack and inner power that the fundamental difference between superficial attraction and true devotion is born. While attraction feeds on novelty, mystery, and what seems unattainable, devotion demands something far rarer: honest confrontation with one's own shadows and limits. A man who has never explored his unconscious remains a slave to his ego, repeating cycles of suffering, self-sabotage, and emotional detachment. It is important to understand that the masculine ego is a master at creating masks. It shields itself with achievements, status, emotional control, and a rehearsed magnetic presence, as if body language alone could hide the fear of rejection or insufficiency. But the truth cannot stay hidden for long. One strategic silence, one well-timed absence is enough to make defenses crumble and allow the deepest emotional pain to surface. What separates an ordinary man from one who is truly devoted is the willingness to dive into his own darkness and acknowledge the emotional alchemy that occurs when one radically accepts personal vulnerability. Superficial attraction is like straw fire. It ignites quickly with ego, impulse, and excitement over the unusual, but it dies out at the first threat to pride or sense of control. It is the game of having, not being. True, deep devotion, by contrast, is a state of self-mastery and surrender, where desire is no longer driven by the need to fill emotional voids, but by the conscious intention to grow, transform, and overcome limiting mental patterns. That is where genuine personal development begins, when a man allows himself to feel, to acknowledge his pain, and above all, to use suffering not as something to escape, but as fuel for inner transformation. In the universe of the collective unconscious, men have been conditioned to hide their pain, to stifle emotions, and to believe that inner power means insensitivity. Nothing could be further from the truth. True power arises from confronting one's shadow, from radical acceptance of the parts we reject, and from the courage to express feelings, even if it means appearing vulnerable in the eyes of the world. When you access that space of authenticity, you discover that control is not about dominating another person, but about conquering yourself, silencing the need for external approval, and cultivating an emotional resilience capable of weathering any storm. It is on that threshold between ego and essence that the secret to touching a man's ego on a profound level is revealed. It's not manipulation, but provoking an existential restlessness that invites him out of autopilot and into recognition of himself as the hero of his own story. When a relationship serves as a mirror reflecting his hidden potential and darkest fears, the process of overcoming psychological growth and inner transformation begins. The call is clear. True passion is born when the ego is challenged to evolve, when attraction turns into devotion, and when a man is invited, without promises or guarantees, to plunge into the abyss of self-knowledge. From the perspective of Jungian depth psychology, desire is not a random impulse or a mere biological reaction. It is a summons from the unconscious, a force constantly seeking to integrate opposites and foster personal development. Guided by mental patterns and the dynamics of the collective unconscious, a man is drawn to what challenges his certainties and beckons his ego beyond the predictable. In this context, love is not only surrender, it is, above all, a battlefield where the masculine ego is tested, where suffering and overcoming go hand in hand, and where the quest for inner power intermingles with the longing for radical acceptance. The true architecture of desire is built upon the tension between the known and the unknown, between emotional control and emotional detachment. The magnetic presence of someone who understands these dynamics is impossible to ignore. It's not about beauty or appearance. It's the silent energy of someone who knows how to provoke but also how to retreat, who uses silence as a tool, body language as a bridge to the unconscious, and boundaries as an invitation to inner transformation. The subtle challenge, not the obvious one, but the one that sparks curiosity without revealing everything, activates in a man the ancestral instinct of conquest, which is not satisfied with possession, but with the process of unraveling the mystery. In this dance, every gesture, every look, every pause becomes emotional alchemy, capable of breaking down the ego's defenses and revealing the potential for transcendence. Desire does not grow in predictable terrain. When everything is given easily, the masculine ego relaxes, loses interest, settles into old mental patterns, and stops seeking psychological growth. The challenge is the invitation to expansion, the reminder that there is still something to conquer, not outside, but within oneself. Here, self-mastery is fundamental. It's not enough to provoke. You must sustain your own essence in the face of another's advances, preserving mystery and authenticity as unwavering compasses. The relationship then ceases to be a battlefield and transforms into a space for learning, acceptance, and resilience. Jungian psychology shows us that every true desire springs from a lack, not a lack that causes passive suffering, but a creative absence that pushes the ego toward transcendence, inner transformation, and self-knowledge. When love is lived consciously, it becomes the most direct path to individuation, the journey of integrating shadows, the unconscious, and as yet unrealized potentials. The subtle challenge, far from breeding insecurity, leads a man to face his own limitations and at the same time the greatness he can achieve. Thus, the architecture of desire is constructed through conscious choices. To provoke is not to manipulate, but to call another to a higher level of connection with himself and with life. Love stops being a contract of comfort and becomes an adventure in self-mastery, radical acceptance, and emotional detachment. And with each new challenge, the unconscious reveals new pathways for psychological growth and the true overcoming of the patterns that limit the masculine ego. The man then only has one decision left: remain on the surface or accept the invitation to dive into the abyss of his own desire. There is a deep, seldom understood secret for awakening not only attraction, but a devotion in a man that can endure time and adversity. Carl Jung revealed that every relationship is above all a mirror, and the first key is to become that mirror of the soul. When someone reflects another's unrealized potential, they touch the unconscious at its most sensitive point, showing a man that under his limiting mental patterns lie greatness, talent, and strength, is like igniting a spark of self-mastery, propelling him to go beyond the ego and come closer to his true essence. That reflection is not achieved with empty words, but with gestures, silences, and glances that communicate confidence, resilience, and radical acceptance of shadows. The second key is what Jung called the paradox of presence. Being a magnetic presence does not mean overwhelming someone with constant attention, but knowing how to occupy the right space, being there, firm and authentic, without giving up mystery and individuality. When the masculine ego perceives that it does not have total control, it is driven towards self-knowledge and psychological growth, learning that devotion is born not of excess, but of the dance between contact and space, between silence and subtle body language. When a man senses the security of presence and at the same time, the lightness of emotional detachment, his unconscious opens to a completely different experience of love, one where desire feeds on strategic absence and constant curiosity. The third key, perhaps the most challenging, is confrontation with the shadow. There is no authentic bond without shared vulnerability. It takes courage to strip away the armor of the ego and allow another to see your emotional wounds, failures, insecurities, and hidden suffering. When you invite a man to share his shadows, without judgment, with radical acceptance, an emotional alchemy emerges that only deep bonds can produce. It is in this authentic space that fear is overcome and inner power thrives, as a man learns to integrate what he once rejected, transforming suffering into psychological growth and shame into resilience. These three keys are practical but demand attention and conscious intention. By reflecting another's potential, maintaining the paradox of presence, and creating space for vulnerability, you stop feeding games of emotional control and begin cultivating mutual personal development. This doesn't mean the absence of boundaries. On the contrary, it demands clarity, self-mastery, and a rare capacity to embrace both light and shadow. True devotion arises when the ego, instead of seeking power over another, surrenders to the inner transformation proposed by love. The invitation, then, is to abandon the old script of manipulation and dispute and open up a new relational dynamic, one in which every interaction serves as a catalyst for psychological growth, self-knowledge, and the overcoming of unconscious patterns. If you dare to apply these keys, you will quickly notice the difference between being just another person in someone's life and being the force capable of sparking an intimate revolution, not only in another, but in yourself as well. Now, the next step is to understand how all of this can be put into daily practice, with concrete examples and experiences lived in the flesh. The time has come to transform deep concepts into everyday actions, because no interior transformation makes sense unless it translates into concrete, visible, and tangible attitudes. In the realm of relationships, emotionally impacting a man goes far beyond rehearsed speeches or empty seduction games. It's about mastering the art of combining words, silences, and behaviors that challenge the ego while calling forth the unconscious to a new level of personal development. Phrases that reveal authenticity, for example, have the power to touch another's shadow directly. I value who I am, and I accept nothing less than genuine respect. Such a firm stance is not about creating barriers, but about activating in a man the realization that true connection demands self-mastery, radical acceptance, and mutual respect. Silence, often neglected, is one of the most powerful tools of body language and emotional control. When used consciously, silence reveals maturity, conveys confidence, and above all, creates space for the other to come into contact with emotions often hidden in the unconscious. Pausing before responding to a provocation, or simply listening with full presence are practical exercises in magnetic presence. They invite a man out of autopilot, confronting the unease of emptiness, doubt, and not knowing, a fertile ground for inner transformation and the emergence of new possibilities. Respect for one's own limits is the foundation of any authentic relationship. Standing firm in the face of requests that violate your values, even at the risk of losing another's interest, is an act of inner power that teaches by example what emotional resilience means. When the masculine ego encounters someone who knows just how far they'll go, it is challenged to reassess patterns of possession, control, and manipulation. This is not imposition, but a silent lesson in self-mastery that inspires growth and psychological development in both parties. The secret is simple. Only those who honor their own boundaries can truly be respected and valued. Authenticity is the basis for any lasting emotional impact. Dropping personas, discarding masks, and acting with transparency disarm the ego's defenses and invite the other to an encounter of essence rather than appearance. Emotional alchemy happens in the details, in the way you say no, in the honesty of admitting a fear, in the courage to share a vulnerability. These seemingly simple gestures have the power to completely reconfigure unconscious relational patterns, awakening in a man the desire to stay near not out of need but out of admiration and respect. Ultimately, the practice demands daily courage. You must renounce the desire to please at any cost, abandon victimhood, and consciously choose the path of radical acceptance. With every phrase, every gesture, every silence, you are in fact educating the other's unconscious and your own to seek genuine relationships grounded in psychological growth and inner transformation. The next step is to understand how modern science biologically confirms everything depth psychology has always known, that love is a force transcending the ego and reshaping even the circuits of the human brain. Delving into the mysteries of love from the perspective of neuroscience, we discover that a man's desire, devotion, and even suffering are not mere psychological dramas but living expressions of a sophisticated biology that communicates directly with the unconscious. When we speak of attachment and passion, three chemical messengers stand out: dopamine, vasopressin, and oxytocin. Dopamine, the fuel of pleasure and motivation, is triggered by challenge, novelty, and the sense of conquest, the very scenario in which the masculine ego feels driven to pursue self-transcendence and mastery. That is why mystery, strategic silence, and the feeling of achievement have such an impact on male personal development. Vasopressin, in turn, is closely linked to the formation of lasting bonds and the protection of what has been won. When a man is challenged to go beyond the superficial and immerse himself in the vulnerability of an authentic bond, his brain releases this hormone, reinforcing mental patterns of fidelity, protection, and emotional responsibility. It is no accident that the balance between magnetic presence and emotional detachment activates brain circuits that favor inner transformation, preparing the ground for psychological growth. Here, emotional control is not an exercise in coldness, but a neurobiological skill for sustaining affection without losing individuality. Lastly, oxytocin, the so-called cuddle hormone, is released in moments of radical acceptance and authentic contact. When there is space for vulnerability, for sincere body language, and for welcoming silence, this hormone builds invisible bridges between souls, dissolving separation and promoting true emotional alchemy. It is in this safe environment, where the ego surrenders and the shadow is embraced, that love reaches its maximum potential for healing and growth, acting not only on the emotional plane, but also reconfiguring the nervous system's responses. Modern science ultimately confirms what Carl Jung's depth psychology intuited long ago. Mind and body form an indivisible whole. When unconscious emotional patterns are transformed, they rewrite neural pathways, influence hormones, and alter destiny. To love consciously, then, is a daily act of self-mastery, a choice that integrates the biology of desire into one's personal development journey, turning every relationship into a living laboratory of acceptance, resilience, and inner transformation. Nothing illustrates the power of Jung's concepts better than the lived experiences of those who have dared to break mental patterns and dive headlong into the emotional alchemy of self-knowledge. In one of the most striking cases, a woman realized that instead of trying to please or conquer through excess, she needed to practice strategic silence and radical acceptance of her own limits. By relinquishing emotional control over her partner, she began to act with greater authenticity, using body language and her inner power to inspire respect, and in doing so, she awakened in him not only desire but deep devotion. The result? A renewed bond in which both grew in resilience and overcoming. Another story illustrates how confronting one's shadow can transform not only a relationship, but an entire trajectory of personal development. A woman, tired of repeating cycles of suffering and emotional pain, decided to show her vulnerabilities without fear of judgment. The impact was immediate. Her partner, moved by her courage, opened up about his insecurities, creating an exceptional connection of trust. This process of radical acceptance and magnetic presence generated an atmosphere of inner transformation for both, dismantling the ego and fostering a truly evolved relationship. There are also accounts of women who, by becoming a mirror for their partner's unrealized potential, no longer saw themselves as victims of fate, but assumed the role of guide in their partner's mutual psychological growth. Rather than focusing on the pain caused by unmet expectations, they practiced emotional detachment, celebrated small victories, and respected each other's individual timing. That respect for personal boundaries and valuing of each person's journey proved decisive in turning love from possession into a safe space for inner transformation. These examples demonstrate that by integrating self-mastery, radical acceptance, authenticity, and understanding of the unconscious, any woman can spark a genuine silent revolution in her relationship. The secret lies in taking responsibility for your own personal development, recognizing that the union of masculine and feminine is, above all, an opportunity for evolution for both. If these stories resonate with you, perhaps it's time to transform your own narrative, because every relationship really can become a living bridge to self-knowledge and the overcoming of old patterns. It is essential to face one fundamental truth. Any quest to impact a man's ego only becomes truly powerful when it arises from an internal movement of reconnection with your own feminine essence. Carl Jung shows us that before transforming another, one must transform oneself, and that implies reclaiming self-mastery, consciously delving into one's own shadows, and embarking on a personal development journey that transcends external validation. True emotional alchemy happens when a woman renounces the desire to please, overcomes the pain of past rejections, and takes responsibility for her own inner evolution, becoming a magnetic presence and a point of balance between the unconscious and the ego. Reclaiming your own essence means discarding once and for all the masks of perfection, inherited mental patterns, and scarcity beliefs that feed insecurity. It's about radically accepting every part of yourself, including the fragilities and emotional wounds long regarded as flaws to hide. By welcoming and integrating those shadows, a woman awakens her inner power, rediscovers authentic body language, and becomes capable of inspiring another, not through manipulation but through the silent strength of example. This stance recovers the emotional control lost in dependency games and creates a space of genuine transcendence and mutual psychological growth. In this process, a woman becomes both mirror and guide, not just for her partner, but for herself. By practicing emotional detachment and radical acceptance of her own pace, she teaches, simply through her presence, that authentic love is built day by day and constantly transformed. When she stops seeking approval and starts offering welcome, mystery, and respect for her own limits, she inspires a man to face his own shadow, urging him to exit autopilot and dive into his inner transformation. Thus, the relationship ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a laboratory of evolution, where every challenge is an opportunity for resilience and emotional alchemy. Finally, the call is for every woman to recognize herself as the alchemist, capable of transmuting pain into strength, shadow into light, ego into consciousness. True conquest does not lie in dominating another, but in being the center of your own gravity, that presence which, even amid suffering, silence, and uncertainty, remains whole, present, and open to psychological growth. By embracing this role, you not only transform your relationship but also reconcile with your deepest mission, to be a bridge between the unconscious and authentic love, between vulnerability and magnetic presence, between your old self and the new being you choose to emerge as moment by moment, a living expression of transcendence and radical acceptance. The true revolution in relationships begins when love stops being seen as possession or a power struggle and starts being recognized as a catalyst for inner evolution. Inspired by Carl Jung, we understand that every bond is a profound summons from the unconscious, an opportunity for self-mastery, overcoming and radical acceptance of one's destiny. The suffering, shadows, and emotional wounds that surface in relationships are not obstacles, but portals to emotional alchemy, inevitable processes that invite us to abandon old mental patterns, illuminate the ego, and allow the magnetic presence of self-knowledge to transform everything around us. When masculine and feminine unite in a dance of mutual respect, emotional detachment, and psychological growth, both ascend to a new level of consciousness, where love stops being a prison and becomes freedom. This integration does not demand perfection, but courage to face the shadow, acknowledge limitations, and choose day after day the path of inner transformation. Emotional control, far from being repression, becomes the capacity to navigate one's emotions with clarity and compassion, showing that true inner power is born from vulnerability and welcoming silence. The revolution proposed here is intimate, individual, and collective. It demands total responsibility for one's own perception, detachment from the ego's old games, and commitment to individuation, that ongoing process of becoming who one truly is. To love from the perspective of depth psychology is an act of courage. It is to accept that another will always mirror our own shadows and potentials, and that only by embracing that reflection can we truly transcend suffering and access a fuller, more conscious, integrated existence. The next step is to listen. What was the greatest unconscious pattern you noticed in yourself while watching this video? Share your experience or opinion here in the comments. Your story may inspire those also seeking transformation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications right now, because that's the only way to ensure access to content that can really change your life. The next recommended video is already on the screen, so take advantage and keep advancing on your path to self-mastery and growth. Hasta luego y domina tu inconsciente.